Alright, pause right here, because what you're about to hear isn't just about money, it's about power. When a country messes with its own currency, it's like pulling the fire alarm inside a crowded building. Everyone feels it, even if they don't know why yet. So keep this question in mind: is this incompetence or strategy? This is the moment where economic policy stops being boring and starts being dangerous. Deliberately weakening the world's reserve currency isn't a normal policy debate. It's more like playing chicken with the global economy. One miscalculation here doesn't just hurt the US, it ripples everywhere.
Half of international trade invoices are priced in it, and around 90% of foreign exchange transactions involve the dollar in some way. While it's easy to assume the US has always been the dominant force across the world, that's not really true, at least not in the way we think of it today. The dollar's current power is the result of decades of careful policy, the exact same system that Trump's team now seems so determined to challenge. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US was focused on securing its spot as the most powerful country on Earth. But on the other side of the Pacific, things were changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Countries like South Korea, Singapore, and China were growing at lightning speed. Cities that barely existed a decade earlier were now packed with skyscrapers, cranes, and glowing skylines. As these economies took off, millions of people suddenly had far more money to spend than ever before. A lot of it went toward the usual things: new tech, nicer cars, bigger homes. But the speed of that growth meant a lot more cash ended up getting saved. The problem was, these countries didn't yet have deep or reliable ways to invest that money at home. There weren't many stable banks, and stock markets were still small, and local companies weren't big enough to soak up all that capital. So instead of keeping their money sitting idle, investors started looking abroad, mainly to the United States. Over the course of a decade, hundreds of billions in Asian savings were poured into the country. This created something of a golden age for the American economy. In just a decade, the stock market more than quadrupled in value. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Apple were all born out of this era of wild speculation and easy money. But under the surface, it also had a more subtle, potentially even more significant effect. It sent the value of the dollar soaring. In just a decade, the currency climbed by nearly 50%, one of the biggest
This part is crucial, so let's slow it down. When foreign money floods into the US, it doesn't just boost stocks, it supercharges the dollar. That sounds good, until you realize a stronger dollar quietly strangles exports. This is the trade-off almost nobody noticed at the time.
homes were overflowing with foreign goods: Japanese electronics, Korean appliances, and Chinese toys. For consumers, this was great news. After all, they were effectively richer without having to actually do anything. But this did come with a major drawback. While it might have been great for the people buying the products, it was crippling for the old-school American businesses. Because the dollar was so expensive, it became really expensive for America to sell their products to other countries. Even for people in America, it made a lot more sense to buy cheaper imported goods rather than the pricier ones made at home. At the same time, cheaper labor markets were quickly opening up overseas. Places like China, Vietnam, and Mexico offered wages that were often less than a tenth of what American workers earned. In some cases, just a few dollars a day. This combination made it basically impossible for American firms to compete. So across the country, businesses, particularly in the manufacturing sector, began to quietly shut down. Within a decade, the US lost roughly 3 million manufacturing jobs, and industrial employment as a share of the total workforce fell to its lowest level.
And this is where the human cost shows up. On paper, America looked richer, but whole towns were being erased. Factories closed, communities collapsed, and the benefits never reached them. So ask yourself, was this prosperity or just optics?
Period. But the thing was, an enormous section of the country was basically left behind. Before we look more at this, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Incogni. If you use the internet as much as I do, then your personal data is already out there, scattered across personal search sites, online directories, and even commercial databases. Data brokers collect and sell it without your consent, and according to the annual breach report, this number is up 211% from 2023 to 2024. That means criminals, stalkers, or even employers can easily access sensitive details like your address, phone number, and family info. That's why Incogni is so valuable. With just one sign up, they legally contact hundreds of data brokers on your behalf and get your data removed. If it reappears, they go after it again. You can even use their custom removal feature. Just send them any link where your info is exposed and a privacy expert will take care of it. And unlike shady players in the space, Incogni is the first and only data removal service independently verified by Deloitte, so you know it actually works. It's 3 simple steps: create an account, authorize them to act, and let Incogni do the rest. Plus, it's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Go to incogni.com/invisiblehand and use the code INVISIBLEHAND to get 60% off an annual plan. Now, let's get back to the video. Nearly half of this income growth went to the top 1%, while the bottom half saw their share of national income fall from around 20% to just under 13%. States that had once relied on manufacturing jobs, places like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, were hollowed out, but this went almost entirely unnoticed while the economy boomed. That is until 2016, the year Trump got elected. If you've been following politics closely enough, you might have noticed something about those states. They're all hardline Trump supporters, and there's a good reason for that. In both 2016 and 2024, he ran on a clear promise.
On every front, in every way, on every policy, we are guided by the same economic goal: to keep jobs in America.
His idea was really to try and roll back decades of globalization, breaking away from the interconnected world economy and replacing it with a network of regional trading blocs. To be fair, that's exactly what he tried in 2016, when his administration slapped 25% tariffs on imported steel. The problem was, they didn't really work. Estimates suggest that the trade war cost the US around 170,000 manufacturing jobs. And at the same time, US companies paid an estimated $46 billion in additional import costs. Not exactly a roaring.
This is one of the most ironic twists in modern economic policy. Tariffs were supposed to protect American jobs, but instead, they strengthened the dollar and made US manufacturing even less competitive. In other words, the medicine made the disease worse.
Explanation that quickly gained traction in Trump's inner circle. His theory was actually pretty simple. When tariffs were first announced, global investors expected them to hurt the economies of countries that sold goods to the US. That uncertainty attracted a ton of foreign money into American assets. After all, at the time, it was still considered by far the safest place to store money in the world. After the tariffs were first announced, foreign investment into the US gradually increased by nearly $200 billion. Of course, by itself, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the thing is, with more money flowing into the country, the value of the dollar ended up getting pushed even higher. And with a more expensive dollar, it became even harder for American companies to sell their products abroad. In an ironic twist, the tariffs that were supposed to reduce American reliance on foreign imports did the exact opposite. All of that meant that while tariffs might help Trump win an election, the only thing that could actually bring back American manufacturing was devaluing the dollar itself. That's at least according to Scott Bessent, who would later become Trump's Secretary of the Treasury. The trouble is, devaluing the dollar isn't really an easy thing to do. The currency has built up a reputation over decades, to the point where even during the financial crisis caused by America, global investors still rushed to the dollar to protect their money. In the past, if a country wanted to devalue its currency, it could use tools like capital controls. That is, placing hard limits on the amounts of the currency that foreigners could buy. But since the 1990s, those kind of interventions have been made practically illegal under most modern trade agreements. On the surface, this makes intentionally devaluing the dollar seem like an impossible task. And for most presidents, it probably would have been. But if we know one thing about Trump, it's that he's not exactly afraid of causing a bit of chaos. If the US government were to engage in massive deficit spending, trade wars, and open political pressure on the Federal Reserve, they might just be able to destroy their own status as the reserve currency of the world. By doing this, there would be a mass capital exodus from the country, with investors looking to buy stability in other assets, like the euro, yuan, or even gold. As crazy as that sounds, the Trump team appears to be totally on board. In the weeks following the election, reports emerged that his inner circle were discussing a Mar-a-Lago Accord, a blueprint for exactly how they would go about weakening the dollar. And over the past year, almost everything his administration has done seems to be pushing in that exact direction. During his now infamous Liberation Day press conference, Trump unveiled a sweeping package of tariffs. China, Germany, even tiny countries like Cambodia weren't safe, being hit with rates as high as 49%. Almost instantly, the markets went into freefall. The Dow fell nearly 8% in a single day, Treasury yield spiked, and the dollar briefly hit its lowest level in years as investors scrambled to figure out exactly what was happening. But then, a few weeks later, something strange happened. Trump quietly reversed most of these tariffs, walking back almost everything that had been announced. By the time the dust had settled, the actual tariff rates were only about half of what had originally been projected. On one hand, that seems like the logical thing to do, given how badly wrong it seemed like the policies went, which could well be what happened. But at the same time, if his goal was to deliberately shake investor confidence, like the Mar-a-Lago Accord suggests, then it worked perfectly. Even though tariffs were rolled back, investors had no idea if or when they might make a reappearance, and as a result, they were a lot more careful about whether or not they should buy dollars. Over the next few weeks, the currency continued to tumble, losing nearly 12%.
And here's the terrifying part. It's actually starting to work, at least in the short term. Exports rise, factories stir back to life, but the bill always comes later. The real question now isn't can this strategy revive manufacturing? It's what breaks first when the world stops trusting the dollar.
Makes a bit too much sense to dismiss it as just that. Since the dollar fell, states like Michigan have seen auto exports climb nearly 12%. In Texas, energy shipments, oil, gas, and refined fuels rose close to 15%. Even states which had been dormant for decades, like Ohio and Pennsylvania, saw steel and machinery exports tick up for the first time in over a decade. But while it might be working for now, that doesn't mean it's without its risks. When foreign investors start pulling money out of the US, that doesn't just weaken the dollar, it also means there is less money flowing around the system for businesses and the government to borrow. That inevitably dries up interest rates across the entire economy. And for a government which is sitting on over $36 trillion in debt, that's a massive issue. Every 1% rise in borrowing costs adds roughly $360 billion a year to interest payments, a cost which already makes up nearly 15% of the government's budget. And it's not just the government that's exposed. Private companies, especially in the tech sector, have built up record levels of leverage over the past few years, fueled by the easy money era that followed the pandemic. Much of that cash has gone into speculative bets on AI and automation, to the point where an estimated 92% of growth over the past year has come from AI-related investment. The problem is, those companies suddenly find themselves paying twice the interest on all that debt. A lot of them could end up going bust. And if that happens, it could quickly push the economy into a deep recession. For better or worse, the US economy has become deeply reliant on its role as the world's reserve currency, a position that has quietly fueled America's prosperity for decades. It's what allowed the country to run persistent deficits, borrow cheaply, and still remain the safest place on earth to park money. Devaluing the dollar might be necessary to change that dynamic, but it's also a massive gamble, one that risks not just the stability of the United States, but the entire global system that's been built around it for the past century. Whether this is part of a carefully calculated strategy or just an improvised political experiment, nobody can really say. But what's clear is that whatever the reason, this shift is set to reshape the global economy for decades to come.